Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Greg Paige. I'm the Director of Horticulture here at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum, and this is...
Evan Villani, horticulturist with Tim Alderton at the J.C. Raulston Arboretum.
Tim's not here, but they work together. We have to clarify that. One does not exist without the other.
It's true.
We are here to talk to you today about practical pruning, and it's a very, very broad topic. It's one, quite honestly, that I skirt when people ask me to talk about it because there's lots of potential to go in the wrong direction. It's also something that people are very scared of. They're scared to prune their plants.
To mess it up.
To mess it up. You can't put it back once you take it off. So what we want to do in this little time frame is to expel some of those errors. We want you not to feel troubled about anything in the garden. That's one of our main goals and missions here. And pruning, like I said, is something we get asked about all the time. So we want to cover some basics on why you prune, what are some of the goals that you have. We're going to talk a little bit about tools.
A little bit about what not to do.
A little bit about what not to do, what not to use to prune, and ending things with a lot of hands-on actual pruning, because the best way for me to remember and learn things is that physical act, to see somebody doing it.
Yeah. We'll go, oh, we forgot to say.
What we meant to do.
Yeah.
So all those things said, if at the end of this you're still not quite sure, there are a ton of resources online. Our extension service, any other state's extension service has lots of information. We're going to show the cover of a very simple, bare bones, basic International Society of Arboriculture pruning guide that you can get on Amazon for, I think it's less than $15. That's a really good place to start. But, and also come out to the garden if you see us, ask us those questions. So all that said, let's talk about some of the basics, some of the things that we wanted to kind of cover. The most important take home with pruning is it helps to maintain a plant from a healthcare standpoint. Having good structure is very important from the growth and development from a young plant all the way through until its last stages on the earth. And doing those things when it is smaller is much better, and we'll show some examples of that. But to me, that's the most important aspect, is that preventative maintenance, plant healthcare side of things. When you're pruning, as we like to say, you're out in your garden, you're physically touching plants, you're going to notice things sooner than later. So it's a good time to look for insects and diseases. It's a good time to look for structure. It's a good time to look for those things that you may miss as you're going about your kind of your daily activities. So that sounds good? Yeah,
but I have a question.
Go.
If plants don't get pruned in the wild, why do we prune them in the garden?
I love that question. That comes up so often. You know, it doesn't happen in nature. Why should I do it? An easy answer for that, and I don't know if this is the one you're looking for, but our plants aren't in a natural environment. It's a man-made environment. A lot of times in the nursery industry, when they're growing things up to size, they will prune to shape so that things look visually the same. They may not pay attention to the structural things. So that's the main reason. In an urban environment, structure of a plant will determine how it reacts to stressful environments, how it reacts to bad weather. There was a really good example in my life. There was a church near where I used to live that had their trees religiously pruned every year. A tornado came through and decimated the area around us, just the strong winds. But driving by that and seeing those trees were mostly unscathed because they had good structure.
Yep. No weak wood was left.
No weak wood was left, no damaged dead wood. The growth of the tree was paid attention to. You don't have to do that for everything, but those are the reasons why that we prune in a natural environment. Here at the Arboretum, I don't know if you've noticed, we don't have a lot of space. We cram and shoehorn things in, hoping that they get enough room. So we have to do some pruning to provide separation and allow things to grow in a more natural way. And we'll talk about that stuff too.
Yeah.
And what am I missing? Anything?
Well, you mentioned plants' reactions,
Yep.
and I think that would be a good transition and talk a little bit about plant response to pruning.
Yes.
So just a little bit about what's happening when you prune. And we'll talk about where you should prune on a plant specifically, because you don't want to leave any wood that will decay and die. Instead, you want to prune back to the nearest live tissue that's going to form new branches, new leaves, or if you're removing a branch, remove it completely at the correct spot.
It's going to heal over.
Right. So on the healing side, this is a little tough without examples, but we'll get back into it later. On the healing side, a plant will want to cover up a wound, seal it in, and so the easier it is to compartmentalize,
yes,
the smaller that wound is, the faster the plant can do it, and so the less opportunity there is for fungi and bacteria. On the growth side, if you're pruning to expand growth or control growth in a way, the buds that are at that, if you're pruning like halfway down a stem on something for shaping, the buds that are nearest that cut will become the more dominant buds on that stem. The hormones and the energy that that plant is producing will then be directed to those buds, and those will be the new end of the branch, and they will shoot out and the plant continues to grow.
And all that stuff is really important because there's a lot more to just taking things off. It's that actual science of how that plant responds to it. And that ties into so many things that we're going to talk about today. The right place to prune, the type of tools that you use, and it's a good segue to talk a little bit about goals of pruning. I had somebody stop me probably my first week here, and it wasn't too far from here actually, and I was pruning. They said, who prunes all of your bushes here? And I wanted to correct them and say, it's not bushes, it's trees and shrubs and other associates. We take high offense to things being called bushes in the horticultural world, but just because you have it in your yard doesn't mean you have to prune it. And having goals is very important. And the most important goals are some of the things that we already mentioned. Removing deadwood is important so that things can heal over, like Evan said. Things that might be crossing or growing into the stem of a tree, it's important to remove those too, particularly in things that aren't multi-stemmed trees and shrubs. You want things to have a central leader so that the tree continues its upward progression and allows air to kind of circulate in. And you don't want any of those rubbing branches. In some cases, like I mentioned also, you might want to provide separation or room for things to grow. That's important here for us. You know, looking around, I see a lot of that kind of stuff that we need to do, but it's never ending for us because we are so small.
Plants keep growing too.
Plants keep growing.
Just keep going.
Another goal is to kind of control the form. And we're big advocates of promoting right plant for the right place. But a lot of times, if you don't have space in your garden, you may have to do some pruning to keep that plant in a controlled space. There's other things like deadheading, removing spent flowers so that things continue to flower, roses, hydrangeas, crepe myrtles, other things. Timing with that is very important. Mm-hmm. But those are some of the basic goals for pruning. Did I miss anything?
No, I have now thought of three things based on what you said. The first of it was you mentioned dead and crossers.
Yep.
And we have a fun little mnemonic device, is it called?
Yep.
We call it like the 5 Ds. It's dead, dying, diseased, decaying, or deranged. And deranged are those crossing branches, those things that will form wounds or grow in funky ways and weaken the structure of the tree. The second thing I was gonna say, this is hard. I wanted to mention that behind us here is a plant we've never pruned. This is Pyracantha red cushion. I believe it came from our mountain crop lab, Tom Rainey's horticulture breeding program. And this was, I think upon release, like a 3 foot by 3 foot shrub. And so we've never touched it, and it just kept growing in its natural shape. And that's also what we do here. We see what happens to some things if you don't touch them.
Right.
And there's your answer. Covered in bees. Bees absolutely love it.
And this is a great example of right plant for the right place. Mm-hmm. This had enough room to kind of do what it's doing now. It's slowly starting to eat up some of its neighbors. I don't mind that as much, especially now seeing it covered in bees. But these are the kinds of goals that may be different from your goals that we have, is to provide enough space for things to do what they do naturally, but also at the end of the day, provide space for things that are close associates so that things don't get swallowed up. And in the theme of JC and doing evaluations, in some cases that might mean it's time for things to go. In this particular situation, this has a lot of things in its favor. The aesthetics of the flowers. Thank you, Blake, for pointing out that the berries are nice and red, but
hence the name Red Cushion. I was like, it's white. Why is it? Why is it called Red Cushion?
Fall color. It's not red. Berries. But the fact that it's covered in bees, that's a high. Those are high marks in my realm of evaluating things. So we'll look at some of the things around it and decide what we want to do. But is this a segue to do some?
Let's
pruning?
talk about tools first.
That's a good idea. Let's do that.
Okay.
We harp on tools a lot because it's part of the trade. It's part of what we do. And the most important thing is,
let's start simple. Yeah.
Is having a good pair of pruners. And there are two basic type. There are side cuts, which is what we like to use.
Yeah, bypass pruners.
The bypass pruners.
They're now the most common thing.
And you would think that we wouldn't have to be bringing this up all the time, but it continues because the counterproductive part of these are anvil pruners. And I may have stole these from Barb Fair. I can't remember where I got these from, but these act like an anvil. They just cut. And because of that action, they end up tearing. So they don't provide a good, clean cut that's going to heal over like Evan was mentioning.
Yeah.
So these we tell people to stay away from.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see, but when you close this, instead of the bypass pruners, it just crushes material, it's bad. It's bad for, I mentioned compartmentalizing the wound. It's bad for that. So that's why we don't use them. And yeah, pruners are your simplest and most commonly used tool. These are going to get you a long way in the garden. But say you start approaching something bigger, because pruners only work up to what, 3/4 of an inch?
3/4 of an inch.
Before it becomes a little...
Yeah. Having a good pair, nice and sharp, is going to be easier to cut. But there comes a point when some of the branches might be too big. And a lot of people's first instinct is to go here. And these are long-handled loppers. They're called that, I don't know, not quite sure why, maybe because the handles are long, but they provide good leverage. And I don't like to tell people to use these for pruning. I like to tell people to use these for cutting things back. It's going to be hard to get to that area of compartmentalization, a branch collar or a similar point on a tree. With these, because they're big, you might tear with these, even though they're bypass. It's just too big. What I like to tell people, if it's too big for your hand pruners, it's time to get out a pruning saw at that point. And there are lots of different types. We err on the side of the more expensive. These are made by a company called Silky. It's a Japanese company. Once I used these many decades ago, this is all I like to use when I prune. And they come in lots of different shapes and sizes. I also like to tell people, just use these for pruning. Don't use these to cut back or to cut roots or anything. You want these to stay clean and sharp. You can have other tools for that destructive side of horticulture, but keep these nice and clean. Another alternative to these,
that's what I was looking for.
these folding saws. I like these because if you're in the garden, these are going to fit in your pocket. They fold out. There are lots of brands out there. Again, this is Silky. This is probably my favorite pruning tool. This is a brand new blade, so I'm scared to look at it directly. It might cut me just looking at it, but super sharp. I also tell people, put on a pair of gloves when you're pruning. You get into things and you might forget. That's a long blade to pull back if you're holding on something. Just my one and only safety tip is these guys are super sharp. Get a high quality folding saw. Felco makes them. You can do a Google and maybe we'll put a list at the end of this video of what to get. But if you're out in the garden, this is going to fit in your pocket. It's not going to take up a lot of space. These fit on your belt loop, which is nice. And if you need to run into the house or something, that stays on your belt loop. This separates. That's kind of a nice feature. And if you're super fancy, a lot of tree climbers will use these. It has spots on it so it can fasten to your leg, so it stays kind of nice and tight and doesn't move around and flop around. But exception to the rule, I really like these tools for pruning because it's a nice long blade, and you can take off pretty good sized branches with that.
Now, what if you got good sized branches above you?
Pole saws. A lot of people, almost everybody has these in their garden. I like the fiberglass because you don't get the wood splinters in your hand if you leave your poles out or don't take good care of them. You can get multiples. The pieces will clasp together, which is nice. I don't do more than 2. I've got neck problems, and if you're looking up at a tree, and if you have more than 2 on, it gets a little bit harder to control. If you need more than 2, it's time to call somebody to get up in the tree. You lose control the higher up you get. 2 is about the max anyway, but you can reach pretty far into a tree with this. The nice thing about these, you can tell the next part. About these? Yes.
So we have 2 different attachments here. Some of them have a 2-in-1, so these will be one thing. But it's nice to have it like this because it's less weighty. It's easier to maneuver. We have here it's like a lopper. It's like a pruner. You just get the small branch material with this. Anything less, like an inch or less, this material will, or this piece obviously lops. And then this, which we have covered, is our saw blade. And this is really nice. It survives me using it, so this is a good saw blade. It's flexible, and it's also long, but you can't really get a grip on small material. So that's when we use the loppers for small material. But most of your big stuff, I mean, pretty good size. Yeah, pretty good size. You can get with a pole
very, very sharp. This can be replaced if you get to a point where it bends. Or it's pretty easy to take that off and put a new blade on. I like the hooks that it has on it because if you cut a branch up high and it falls into the tree, you've got something to hook onto. We even have an attachment that just has the hook.
Yeah, that's the one that's on there now.
If you're pulling branches out of a tree or something like that, it's very useful. Another safety tip, if you're using this above your head, it's nice to wear some safety glasses because the sawdust trickles down and it's going to go straight into your face without fail. Even if the wind's blowing away from you, it's going to go right in your face. So having some safety glasses on will help eliminate that and save you from a trip to the urgent care, which is no fun, but little simple safety tip.
And the last thing I'll mention about saws, and we'll get back to that, is that you want to be using closer to the base. So this is kind of used as a guide. So you're pushing up to here, and then you're using this part of the saw. If you start getting too close to the tip, you're gonna catch the tip out, and then it'll catch back into the wood, and it's gonna be frustrating, and you might bend your saw. So not using the tip, instead using this area of the saw. Okay.
Very good.
That is tools. Thanks for sticking with us. You will see some plants here shortly.
Yes, some actual demos.
Okay, so we have here a plant from the nursery, and we're gonna talk a little bit about structural pruning on early plants.
Yes. The best time to do pruning on anything is when things are small for lots of reasons. You eliminate dead and potentially diseased stuff. You eliminate crossing things, multiple leaders and that kind of stuff. The tree is younger and it's going to respond quicker to those sorts of things. And also if this were a 15 to 20 foot tree, it's going to be a much bigger cut, a wound open much longer, all those things.
It's so much more work on an older tree.
So much more work. So if you have the opportunity and pretend with us for this next few minutes that this is a plant that's been in the ground for a growing season, that we come back and we do some of the things that we've been talking about. So the 2 things that we see with this are it's a little bit of dead in here that now is a good time to take that out. And there's a really nasty kind of a crossing, just structurally messy additional leader in here that now is the good time to kind of take that out. We could do some superficial things and take out smaller things, but at the end of the day, this guy here is going to cause problems, and it needs to come out. And it's a good size to do with hand pruners, and will be much easier to do now than down the road.
And what would happen if we left it?
If we left it, and this is the one we're talking about, all of this right here. If we left it, it would continue to kind of grow in towards the center of the plant. Eventually, these two very strong leads are going to start to rub and grow together. That's going to cause wounds on both of those branches. And you don't want that to happen because that's going to cause problems down the road. It could eventually weaken both of them, and then you're going to have total failure to a big chunk of the tree. So to eliminate that, now's the time to take out something that's a little bit more of size. And you see it before we do it, and then we'll prune it and show you what it looks like after. So whenever you're ready for us to chop, go ahead.
So here we're just outside this really small branch collar here. And this pruner is just gonna make one clean cut, and you're left with a small wound. Like Greg mentioned, the tree is young. It will very quickly heal that over, and it'll be like it was never there. And now you won't have that future problem of these two rubbing together, maybe making some sort of weak wood, included bark, or otherwise a wound.
And all that energy and hormones that Evan was talking about earlier, the science of pruning, instead of all that energy going to that branch, now it's going to go to the rest of the tree. It's going to go here, it's going to go here, and it's going to go here. And this will now compensate for that being gone and start to kind of fill in this area as it kind of grows naturally. So something that simple. And I don't know if you can get a good shot, Alexander, but that part that Evan was talking about, it's called the branch collar, and there's a little bit of a swelling right here, right before he pruned, and that is universally, that's the blueprint for what the area that you want to use to cut to remove a branch. If you cut too close and into that area of the trunk, it doesn't have the corrective tissues to grow over as easily as it does here.
Yeah.
That's going to heal over probably in a couple growing seasons, and that wound will disappear over time as the taper increases and the tree kind of grows upright.
Yeah, if you've heard the term heartwood, if you cut too deep into the main trunk, you're in the heartwood, and like Greg said, the tree can't compartmentalize that. No. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the dead wood, sorry, that you want to take off, Evan mentioned this also, is you want to go down to live tissue. So, you know, there's a branch growing here. So just above that little piece will heal over, and you've eliminated that dead wood. A little bit more there. I like just pointing and shooting here.
In this one, you can make a choice, and you could always choose to take off the whole branch if it's not what you like. I don't like this little twig, so it's gone. That's
a much stronger growing point. You've got more leaf tissue that's going to provide more photosynthesis. That was a good instinctive call. So a lot of the dead is taken off. One more thing that I would do at this point, and then we will call it done. This one's growing in towards other things. That's going to start to rub as that gets bigger, and I would take off that one as well. So that's it for this plant. That's good for a couple seasons. As you're engaging with your garden and out in the garden and keeping an eye on things, watching things grow, watching that wound heal over, the tree is going to be much better for this long term. And you've done a lot of preventative stuff to avoid any kind of structural issues or wounds from things rubbing that make the plant stressed and more likely to have insect and other disease issues, just with some of those simple basic pruning things.
And one last thing I want to mention is that you can prune too much.
Yeah.
Especially on young plants that are trying to establish and that are still trying to get their root situation in order. You can prune too much because what is happening is all the leaves that are on the plant, it's using to produce sugars that will go to the roots. So it is using that energy. And if it doesn't have that kind of leftover vigor, then pruning too much will make it slower to root in and set in and possibly stress it out.
That's a very good point and a good segue to something I wanted to mention is now let's come back to reality. This is going to go, come from the nursery out into the collection. I would have waited to prune off a lot of this stuff. The dead wood, yes, but live branches, I would have waited until a growing season. just exactly what Evan said. You want to leave as much of that tissue, growing tissue on there to help with the plant to grow, to get established, and to reduce the stress it's already going to be in, going from this nice daily watered environment to the hard real world of being out in the Arboretum. Leaving that stuff on for one growing season is good. There was always that kind of myth that before you plant, you need to do a lot of pruning and reduce the size of the plant. You don't need to do that. Give it a growing season and then come back and do that structural stuff. Trees and shrubs tend to grow slow. That's not going to cause a lot of damage in 1 year's time if we had left that. So back to reality with that little comment.
Okay, and now I think we're going to get into the garden and do some pruning.
Yep. All right, so one of our first demos that we're going to do is it's the goals of this particular pruning are multitudes of things. The first is to remove a branch that's rubbing and causing a wound on the branch we're going to remove and a bigger branch above it. The other is this is a pretty prominent thoroughfare through the garden, and as the tree has grown, it's shooting some branches lower down. During wind, rain events, it's going to sink down even lower. When we have moonlight in the garden and lots of people coming back and forth, they become a little bit of a problem. We don't like to remove things just to make a big corridor. I like that people have to engage with plants, and I like that they're kind of close, but this is a situation where we're going to lift it just enough, and we're going to eliminate a really potential a structural problem where both the branches are being damaged by those branches rubbing. So I'm going to let Evan do all the hard stuff. He's going to show there's a method to remove branches that are big and weighty called the snap cut method, where you cut underneath and then just a little bit in front of it, and that alleviates the weight, and it should, in theory, snap off and drop straight down. If you didn't do that, the weight of the branch would cause tissue to tear back into an area that's not going to heal very well, and it's going to look very unesthetic, ugly,
Yeah.
to be blunt.
I've made those mistakes here in the garden. It's like a scavenger hunt if you want to find them.
No, we will not point those out. They're very few and far between.
And I wanted to say this garden has survived me, so me learning how to prune. So if I can do it, you can too. Don't be too afraid.
Same goes with me. So go ahead and show the demo.
Okay, so we're gonna look at this branch right here, and we're gonna remove the weight so that we can make a clean cut back here where it's important that it all heals over. So this needs to come off. As Greg mentioned, first you do an undercut. You only need to get about a quarter of the way through the branch. And then you come out a few inches out towards the branch. Otherwise, what you just did was kind of pointless. And then you cut down. And you hit Blake a little bit because you weren't paying attention. So that's a good point. Safety, don't stand under the branch. And so now you're left with a snap cut. So the weight was all that, I don't know the word, but all the force that was going down, instead of tearing the branch back, it has all been relieved at this point where I already cut into the branch. Okay? Now we're gonna come further back. I'm gonna do one more, we call this a 3-point cut, right here. So point 1, under. Point 2, over and out onto the branch a couple of inches. And I mean, this one isn't really gonna snap. I'm probably gonna cut all the way through it, but it's best to make that undercut for safety because you never know what's gonna happen. And then finally, the 3rd point, and I don't know can we get a good angle on this? Okay, so we mentioned that bark collar before. So we're outside of that swelling area. We are just cutting the bark tissue, and that will heal over nicely. And we cut down. And there it is. So we're just gonna do this one more time because this tree needs it anyway. This is another lowest branch on the tree and it's gonna come off. So I'm gonna do the 3-point cut again. So you start under. You come over and out. And then hand placement is key. These are sharp saws and you always wanna make sure your hand is out of the way of the saw. I'm a righty, so it's always gonna be on the left side. And there it is, already snapping. And then, so I'm gonna come here. It's a little harder to make the cut, but I wanted to hold this branch so that I made a very small wound on the other one. So I'm gonna make sure this has absolutely no weight on it. Trying to use my hand to stabilize the branch so that the saw can flow smoothly.
Beautiful.
There's the cut. It's never gonna be exactly perfect, but we just get it as close as we can.
So another example of lifting and what we're doing in this particular situation, we have a crepe myrtle, which is a very common garden plant. A lot of people have these and deal with these issues. This is growing over some perennials. And just to give a little more light and air circulation here, we're gonna take out 3 branches to kind of lift this. After we do that, something that crepe myrtles are known for, you can see a lot of suckers coming up from the ground. If we let those go, by the end of the growing season, they'll probably be up to here. We want to remove those because they're kind of unsightly. They're pretty easy to take off just with hand pruners, but those are 2 of the goals for this particular garden. I would be remiss if I didn't mention some pruning snafus with crepe myrtles. A lot of people believe that they need to be topped or cut back very severely. I think it's one of those situations where you see your neighbor doing it and you think you're supposed to do it. And there are a bountiful number of people that will do this type of work for you, no questions asked. That's a horrible thing to do to them. It stresses them out. It doesn't make them flower better, which is how that operation is particularly sold. If you top them, they'll produce more flowers, not necessarily. It makes them much weaker structurally because, like these suckers, that growth grows incredibly fast. It takes a lot of resources away from the plant and just it's always in a state of stress, and it never has a chance to kind of recover from that. Right plant, right place. If you have to have a crepe myrtle and you're a part of that decision making when they're planted in front of a home, choose one that's a little bit smaller. This particular cultivar is one that stays a little more diminutive in terms of some of the bigger ones that you'll see here at the JC Raulston. But there's pruning that you can do to kind of keep them in shape, and we've talked about that sort of thing. But for this present example, we're going to remove these from a structure standpoint, allow air and more light to get in, and get rid of the suckers. And I'm going to let the master pruner do that for you.
I don't understand why anyone would top these trees. I mean, the bark is beautiful, the architecture is beautiful. I think the only reason it became popular is also because crepe myrtles are tough and they can survive that process. Most trees cannot. So we're going to go ahead here. This is our first one, and once again, we'll be doing the 3-cut method. We want to reduce the weight on this branch to make a clean cut here at the bark collar. Undercut. Come out and over. Snaps off. And now, crepe myrtles have a very nice, obvious swelling point, and so it tells you exactly where to cut. It's very nice. Okay, that's one. We're gonna come over here and do it again. This is a bit of a small branch, and realistically, you could just lift it. You might even be able to get it with pruners. I'm gonna come around to this side, and I might as well do the 3-cut method. Little undercut, little overcut, back at the point where you want it. And I'm being slow here so that once I cut through, I don't come into too much of the bark tissue. I made a small wound with the saw, but it's okay. Again, crepe myrtles are tough. They can take it. I'm also realizing now as we're filming, this is kind of a one-shot deal. So if we just skipped over a branch, I think that would be really funny. You'd notice that I would make a mistake. Anyway, one more 3-cut method. I'm supporting the branch just in case. We come under. We come out and over. And then the point here, nice bit of swelling right here. We're gonna keep that branch collar. And there it is. Suckers.
Who are you calling a sucker?
Hey. Now we'll move on to the suckers. Pretty simple. There's no way to fully eliminate suckers. You can't poison them because you'll poison the whole tree. You're just gonna come down to the ground and cut them as low as you can, leaving as little plant material to resprout as possible. Use nice sharp pruners. You can watch Greg's video on tool maintenance, I believe, if you want to learn how to sharpen your tools. Get some schmutz out of the way. And there's a clean tree trunk. Look how pretty. And now none of that vigor will go towards these suckers and the rest will go into the tree. Okay, so here we are outside the white garden. And this is a forsythia that is kind of going against the formal look of the white garden. I think this looks kind of messy, and this is a good opportunity to talk about shaping a shrub. So as Greg mentioned, there's not really a wrong thing you can do to a forsythia. They're really tough. They'll resprout from just about anywhere. So this is a good kind of starter plant to learn how to prune on. And there's some strategies that we use to prune, to see, because like Greg said, you can't glue it back on once it's off. So we want to step back and see and take this slow, take off a little bit at a time, and then go from there. So one decision at a time. So the biggest thing that I've noticed is this sticking out into the path, sticking up, looking just really janky. So I know for a fact I want this gone. So I'm gonna come back here between two nodes, towards the bottom of a node, not leaving a stump. That's gone. So now this is a little bit trickier. So I want to step back and look, and I think, and this is another trick that Greg uses, you pull this out of the way and you ask if the shrub looks better. And I think it does. I think it offers a better view here. So I'd know that I would like this gone. So I'm going to cut it even lower. I'm gonna leave a little bit here at the base because there's some healthy suckers here at the bottom that will resprout. And that's gone. Now I step back again. I say, okay, what else looks messy? I'm gonna walk in here because this is really drawing my eye. Again, if it's down, gone, and out of the way, I think the shrub looks cleaner, which means it's gonna go. So then you decide how far down do you wanna cut it? Is there any healthy material you wanna leave? I could cut it, for example, we could do a good zoom in on this one. I'm gonna cut it right here. Let me know when you're ready. So that's the kind of location you want. However, I'm also now realizing that the major stem here is dead. So I'm going to prune that back to that little bit of live tissue. This is also sticking out. So I'll take this back. And I've made a few cuts. So before I go crazy, I'm gonna look back and step in again. Now I think this guy should go. And there's always the question of how far back you should cut. If anything would leave a big visual hole, I don't think it's worth it. For example, if instead of this being one green mass, if you had to remove a branch and it left something like this, I would think you cut too far back. I want my forsythia to look like one mass of foliage. I don't want to see into the architecture because it's nothing pretty. It's visually distracting. So I come here on this one. There's not a lot of great material, so I'm gonna cut it back to a major point. And then I just see a couple more oddball things, and then we can get into more of the specifics. So this sticks out more than I would like. And this sticks out much more than I would like. So now we're looking a whole lot better. That's at least 3/4 of what I wanted to do. That's the majority, and if I left it here, I would be content. And so now it's the question of how neat do you want it? How formal are you going? Or do you like this kind of a little more natural look? And I'm looking at this shrub as a whole, and it's got kind of this medium height here, this tall height here, and this low height. And there's not really a way to make all those things work together. So I think I would leave this as a natural shape. Do you want to talk about shearing?
Sure. So some type of pruning that we're not going to show a demo of, but it's worth talking because there's a lot of opportunity to go awry, is shearing. And you can use handheld head shears. You can use electric ones. This is an ilex at the entrance to the White Garden. This particular plant can take shearing, and this is a little homage to formal gardening that we do here. And we use electric hedge clippers in here to keep these kind of nice and tight and box shaped. One of the benefits of that is you get this nice lush growth, which I love. But if you are haphazard in your use of having that power in your hands of gas-powered, battery-powered, electric-powered tool, it's not a lightsaber. These plants are pretty tough. They can take that, but once it's off, it can't go back on. And if you go too deep, what ends up happening is you have a very short layer of active growth, and that's got to provide for a plant that's been established for a long time. So in all my world travels of looking at plant problems, some of the worst I've seen are on things that have been hedged and sheared because they go back to such a small amount. You don't have a lot of growing tissue there. So these are, you can see a lot. We don't go back very hard, so you see a lot of green growth that goes further back in. That's going to make this plant healthier and happier long term. So we are very light and very selective on how much we take back. It's just enough to give it kind of that nice formal shape as you enter into this nice kind of natural environment, and it sets things off very, very well. So grain of caution if you're going the route of that. We like things more natural, like what Evan just did to the forsythia. To me, that's quicker. You get a much better effect. It's better on the long-term health of the plant. And I like that natural look. It looks much better. But there is room for this, all things in moderation.
I want to add one thing on kind of, I guess, the science, but the reason why it's not just leaves all the way through is because it's so dense.
Yep.
Everything past there is totally shaded out. So there's no reason for the plant to produce leaves there.
Yep.
They do nothing for the plant. They would just be an expenditure of energy. And so to keep this kind of nice look, you should expect to let your shrubs grow at least a 1/4 inch every time you shear them. If that makes sense, they should get slightly bigger every time you shear them. You shouldn't be shearing back too hard.
Good point. So we're in the perennial border, and the perennial border is themed. It has sweeps of colors as you kind of go down towards the necessary. And one of the things I love about it is the addition to woody plants into this realm of mostly herbaceous stuff to extend that season of bloom. And what we have here is a tamarisk. This is a plant that's a horrible weed out west, but it's much more well-behaved on the East Coast. And it has this really pretty silvery green texture. But as we were just discussing as we walked up, to see this thing in flower, it'll literally knock the socks off of your feet. It is covered with smoky pink blooms that just cover it. And that's why we have it in this border. This is a plant that you can cut back pretty hard every year. And we did that last year, but you can see there's a lot of deadwood in it. So this is the goal of this particular pruning is to remove this deadwood. It looks bad. It's not helping the plant long term, and that's actually going to shorten the life of it if we were to leave it on here. And this is well past our aesthetic boundaries of what we want to leave here on the perennial border. So I'm just going to slowly start taking things off that I see need to be removed. And a lot of this is going to be saw cuts, I believe, because there's quite a bit of dead in here. But the effect afterwards is really going to give you that take home of why we're kind of cleaning this up. So it's time for a saw because pruners are too small at this point. And even with deadwood pruning, it's good to be conscious of all the things that Evan was talking about, supporting these as they go. And I'm cutting down to what I can tell is live wood on the plant. And a saw is much faster than pruners are going to be. Another goal is not to cut myself with this brand new blade because it's very sharp. And I'm being very careful not to cut any live growth because I want to keep as much of that on there as exists for that nice feathery effect. One of the things that I like about pruning, for me, it's very cathartic. It's thinking work. It gives you time to think about things, process things. As I like to tell people, think about your transgressions in life. It's good thinking work for me, and I like the overall effect that you get after you kind of clean something up. And a good example of that was what Evan just did with that forsythia. He took that oyster and turned it into a beautiful pearl. After he was done, it was nice and had structure and kind of meaning. So I'm going to take this opportunity to step back, kind of look at it, see what I'm missing. Another thing worth talking about with pruning is if you stand in the same spot, you're just pruning in one area. And that's going to become very obvious when that starts to come out. I had somebody do some work for me years ago in one of our collections, and I could walk to the spot this person stood and didn't pay attention to the whole thing. So that's another reason just to kind of step back and look and see what you're doing. And I'm missing all this stuff in the front. Sometimes I'll start a cut with the saw and then finish it with pruner so I don't cut off too much live tissue like I did there. And I'm not really going for form as much as I am for this nice feathery green, and honestly just cutting the dead off. And having said that, I don't like the way this looks. So I'm going to cut that whole little stub off back to this big cluster of branches. And again, taking a beat to kind of look. And I'm sort of kind of happy with that. So aesthetically, that looks better. It's kind of a mess structurally, but Taking off that is going to encourage it to kind of fill in some of these holes and dead spots, and you'll get a better effect of that nice kind of green tissue. So again, just those goals of taking out the dead, maybe a little bit of shaping up with this, and I don't feel so bad about what we have with this last example for you all.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us for Practical Pruning. We're going to do one last overview. Mention that book that Greg mentioned in the beginning. It is Best Management Practices Tree Pruning. You'll probably see an image on your screen. For things that are too big that you can't handle, we recommend calling a professional arborist, because it is always important to maintain your big trees, especially around, property like houses, or if they're over your driveway, or, there's people anywhere walking underneath them. And then a lot of people will probably ask about timing for pruning. When is the best time?
We didn't talk about that. It's a good point.
We didn't. In general, we say, we do it when we can. They're in an ideal world, maybe the dormant season is good, because
yes, in an ideal world, that's the best time. We do not live in that world, and I like Mark. Mark brought that up, and I never thought about it till he said that. But you prune when you have time. There's obvious things that you don't want, times when you don't want to prune. I don't like to tell people to prune a brand new plant before you plant it. It's going to have enough stress in its life. You can wait a growing season. I don't like to tell people to prune things that are stressed out during bad weather incidents. Right now, we're in a horrible drought, and we're this close to being away from water restrictions, I think, in our part of North Carolina. So you don't want to do something that may stress a plant out when it's already a stressful situation. Anything that's too big for you to handle, like he just said, don't get on a ladder. Don't climb up into a tree without the right stuff. Professionals are going to do a much better job, a much safer job. I can tell you countless horror stories, but it behooves you to get a professional. It behooves us to keep those people in business doing what they do, because they're good at it, and we're blessed with a lot of really good companies in this area. Those are some of the big ones that come to mind. Tons of resources out there. Seek them out, learn about it, start out small. Don't be afraid to do stuff, but take your time, take a piece off, step back and look. Though I hope those were some of the take homes that you got from us through this program. Anything else?
And I know that we're preaching to the choir here, but plants are worth it. It's work to prune them. It's work to get arborists to get out and look at your big trees. But plants are worth it. And so, take care of them, and lovely gardening. Happy gardening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that was a heck of a lot of fun. It was very
long.
Very it was. I can prune it back a little bit. But I didn't even see me do that. But we did have some questions come in while we were watching that. So Kathy was wondering, if I want to control height on a tree, can I trim the top of the tree, or will that just cause bushing out?
This is a common question that we get about pruning. And it's easy to say, pick the right plant for the right spot. We inherit things a lot of the time, but you're not going to stop a tree that gets tall from growing tall by cutting the top out of it. You're going to cause more problems by doing that. You can selectively prune some things when the trees are younger, the plants are younger. But the example I use, we were talking about this earlier. If you've got a white oak in your yard, that white oak's going to get 80 to 90 feet tall, and you can't whack the top back and expect it to behave and not continue to want to grow up.
No, that'll kill the tree actually slowly.
It's going to cause it to put out. That's what happens with crepe myrtles in a nutshell. You cut the top, it sends out a lot of growth and energy to recover those wounds and put out more growth. Those pieces get weak. They rip apart in storms. It causes stress. They're more prone to insect injury. It's not an advisable thing to do, unfortunately.
No,
that's a simple answer.
That is a great way for dishonest tree care companies to make money.
It is. If you're looking for someone to do tree work for you, and one of the things that they list that they do is topping, go to another tree care professional.
For sure. Okie dokie. Julia wants to know, can you sharpen hand saws or do you need to replace the blade?
We decided it's too hard.
It's very hard to sharpen those saws. And honestly, you know, I'm the old man sitting here. I've been in public horticulture a long time. And when I first started, I knew people that knew how to sharpen those saws. And there aren't many of those people out there that do that sort of thing. So it's almost easier to get a new blade. If you're someone that's handy and knows how to do that, I'd say go for it. The negative effect of doing that is you're not going to have a saw that's quite as sharp. So having a sharp pruning saw is important. So if you're using it correctly, like we mentioned, if you're just using it for pruning, that's going to keep that saw sharper and in better health. If you're getting it in the dirt, or you're cutting roots with it, or you're doing all your cutback stuff with it, have tools that you use just for that, and then keep some tools in your toolbox that are just for the fine pruning, and they'll last a whole lot longer.
Cool. Okay, so Beth asked about 3 loropetalums that were sheared into balls that she doesn't like and they're way too tall. Julia asked about a camellia, which is also way too tall. And Laura was wondering, if you need to cut a shrub back to half the size, what do you recommend?
Wow, combining a lot of questions.
Let's do it.
Well, the easy answer for the loropetalum is a rejuvenation cut. So cutting the plant all the way back down to the trunk, 8 inches from the ground, and then letting it resprout and doing a little bit of selective pruning on which suckers you want to become the architecture. A few years after that, it'll become a normal looking shrub. It already has a lot of energy in the root system, so it won't take as long as opposed to just doing it from a very small plant to begin with. You get the jump start there. Referring to camellias, Laura's question, pruning saw all the way. It's where you're cutting, and for most shrubs, there's almost no reason to use a chainsaw. I mean, unless you're hitting material that's like the size of my head.
Yeah, chainsaws don't do nice clean cuts unless you're cutting big branches. And there's a safety factor associated with chainsaws also. You're going to get cleaner cuts with sharper pruners and with pruning saws. One note on the loropetalum, I'm going to keep harping on the right plant for the right place. They get big, and there are smaller versions, smaller varieties out there. Move towards those for ones that you want to stay smaller in a confined space.
And then the camellia, it's
same thing.
Yeah. You can be pretty harsh with them. I've had some sad stories with camellias where you cut them back and they don't recover. They don't recover.
Nope.
But usually I have good luck with just hitting them hard.
Yeah.
Doing what needs to be done, pruning back to the right place on the plant, and then again once it sends out those new shoots, doing some selective pruning if you want it to keep a natural shape. If you're shearing it, then yeah. But
you might lose some flowers
really
with severe
camellias.
pruning like that too.
Sure.
It's going to take it a year or two to recover from that.
But well-established, mature shrubs have a much higher chance of sprouting back. And for things like camellia that don't always sprout back, leaving some green down low so that it has growing points to come back for is always a good idea. Okay, Jared had not a question, but a comment. He says, when pruning trees and shrubs with alternate leaves, I always try to prune back to a bud facing away from the center of the tree. Otherwise, the new bud will elongate towards the center. And you actually pointed to a branch that formed from that sort of way, and it was just going to go right into the center of the tree, cause future problems, prune that out. So great comment, point. Jared. That's
Thank you, Jared. Comment.
Yeah. And Sandy had a comment about ants. She noticed a bunch of ants crawling around on that crepe myrtle. She wants to know
what's eating, or are they eating something?
What's that about? Why?
Yeah. Our good friend, the crepe myrtle bark scale, when they're feeding on plants, their excrement is very high in sugars, and those ants are actually eating the sugars that those bark scale are producing. And we've even seen ants moving the scales around, almost in essence farming them for that excrement. That excrement, that honeydew that it's called, also produces, you see the black on the trunks or on the sidewalk or on your car or your picnic table. Those sugars also attract sooty mold and mildews. So that's what the black is. It forms on those sugary excrements.
Cool. Okay, and we are running all kinds along today, so let's do just one more question. Another one from Sandy. She says, any general reminders on the best times to prune, plant species dependent, like whether they bloom on old or new growth, that kind of thing?
Those are good guidelines if you want to preserve flowers. So you don't want to prune off flowers for the next season. I like Mark's attitude with pruning and planting. Sometimes you got to prune when you have time. And I had somebody tell me once years ago, prune when your saw is sharp. You might lose some flowers, but you need to take care of structural issues when you can. We mentioned all through this talk to when the plants are dormant, you can see structure much better. That's kind of a better time to prune. You don't want to prune when things are under stress before you're going to plant or right after you plant. Give that thing a growing season to get established. It's going to use all that foliage to help build itself up from stress. We're in a drought right now, so we're telling people we recommend hold off on pruning till maybe the fall, just so that you're not going to further stress the plant out by removing tissue. Or the hedge that we mentioned, you might want to wait to do that kind of pruning, because that's going to produce a lot of new growth. That new growth is going to need water. It's going to need sustenance. It's going to take it away from helping that plant get through that stressful time frame.
One thing I would like to throw out is that when all pruning cuts elicit a growth response.
Yep.
So you do need to be careful when you're pruning in the autumn. You don't want to be pruning too close to frost, because you can certainly prune the plant and then it flushes new growth. And before
Absolutely.
that growth can harden off, you get freeze coming in and you just zap the plant with, if you just hadn't pruned, that the growth that it already existed would be more tolerant to that. So
Yep.
I put a moratorium on my own trees on the 1st of September. That's the last day that I prune every year. And then I don't until after the new year for stuff that flushes on new growth.
Me too, in general. I try not to, because I don't want that thing to put out new growth.
Yeah.
And then Mother Nature comes in and snaps it back.
Yeah. But as far as an easy guideline for when to prune to avoid cutting off flowers accidentally, Sophia made this pointed this one out. If you wait until right after it flowers, that's usually a good time to prune any plant. And you're never gonna kill a plant by pruning at the improper time. You're just gonna really slow it down, if anything else.
Cause it's some undue stress.
Yeah, for sure. So to Greg's point, where you prune it whenever you have time, that's a very, very fair point.
If you miss some flowers for a growing season, it's all going to circle itself back around.
Yeah.
You're taking care of structure or dead wood or whatever.
For sure.
Yeah.
And if you're doing your research before you go in there and prune, you're cutting off flowers ahead of time and you're okay with that. You're doing it for the sake of the size of the tree, and you'll get flowers later on down the road. So no worries there. Cool. Okay. Well, like I said, that is all the time that we have for today.
That was a good one.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Evan, for taking us around the garden and showing us how to prune. I really did appreciate the demos on the 3-point cut. Definitely. It's a very useful thing. And actually see somebody do it is incredibly useful as well.
Great.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us today on the Midweek program. We will be back next week. Oh, next week is the 5th Wednesday in April, so we're going to be having ourselves a horticulture hour.
I like horticulture hour.
Me too. So make sure you join us for that. It's going to be an hour-long Q&A. Thank you for joining us live and bringing your questions. Make sure you join us live next week for our horticulture hour and bring those questions again. We will see you all next time. Y'all take care.